Hi, just to make sure that you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Awesome. All right, we're good. Let's go ahead and begin. I'm happy to affirm the resolution that humans should eat to live, not live to eat. Let's understand what this topic is saying before we step in. This is obviously an interesting idiomatic phrase offered by Socrates early on in the, I believe it was the 4th or 5th century BC. And the emphasis here should not be as much to break each word down individually and define it, but understand what the idiom is saying at its whole. Now, the McGraw-Hill Dictionary of American Idioms and Phrasal Verbs, which is a real thing. I didn't know they made dictionaries for actual quotes, but they do. Says this means, quote, eating should not be your favorite activity, but something you do to maintain your health. And there's an easy way of understanding this. Do we prioritize our life and our longevity as the main thing that we want to enhance? Or do we want to maximize the activity of eating as paramount in our lives? And I think it goes without saying, it's obvious that longevity is what's most important, and that's why I'm happy to affirm. So let's step down into the first res analysis you can remember as focus on choices. Now, there's a lot of instances where eating what you want and eating what tastes good and is enjoyable will actually increase your longevity. And that's not something that we can consider as relevant in the debate. For me and my opponent to offer you examples back and forth where both sides equally contribute to each other won't help you make a decision. And this is true for all resolutions that pose two concepts. We have to find the areas where they conflict. In other words, we can't simply, if we said like freedom is better than democracy, that statement's meaningless because both of them are inseparable. We have to find an instance where we actually have to choose between these two concepts for it to make sense. In other words, we must find instances of the res where we have to choose between food enjoyment and overall life and longevity. And my argument is that the better choice is to choose that longevity. Let's get into my weighing mechanism you can remember as longevity. There's a reason that we emphasize this so much. We already live our lives according to this way. We practice healthy behaviors. We check out the doctor. The reason there's a big cry about health insurance and politics is because people really, really do give a rip about living. And for us to put a sidebar by that says eating is actually the priority stands counter to everything that our human species has accomplished, not just in terms of its evolution, but also in terms of what its values are in society. My contention is that you can remember as harmful to practice. If we're really going to live out the idea, for society that we should live so that we can eat, we're going to develop food addictions. We're going to develop unhealthy eating habits because we have so much emotion and so much emphasis and priority placed on the activity of eating. Instead, eating should be functional. It should be done to maintain our health because that's the way we're going to achieve the greatest amount of longevity, which is the thing that is most important to our species.
I have, of course, a different view of this debate. This debate is about sex. Well, actually, it's about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm hoping does not appear backwards to my opponent and to the audience as it does to me at this time. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist who in the 1940s proposed a hierarchy of needs. His theory was that if a person is not meeting their most basic needs, they are unable to meet needs that are higher up the ladder. A common criticism of Maslow's hierarchy is that he put sex down here at the bottom under physiological needs, when in fact sex is also key to meeting many other needs higher up the ladder, whether it is security, love and relationships, self-esteem or esteem of colleagues, or self-actualization. The contra in this debate is that humans need not eat only to live, but may eat for other purposes. And through this debate, I will argue that not only does food help meet our physiological needs, or as my opponent puts it, our needs for health and longevity, but the food is an integral part of helping us meet our higher needs that we can meet beyond simple health and longevity, whether it's love and relationships, esteem, or self-actualization. I'll start by talking about the very top of this ladder, self-actualization. You see, while I ate food today in order to sustain my life, I also made food choices today to help me prepare for this very debate. I brewed myself a carafe of my relaxation tea that helps me focus. I had a glass of apple juice to help raise my blood sugar. I have a large glass of water here. This is more water than I would normally need to sustain myself, even using the liberal quantities of water I normally drink, because I need to hydrate my vocal cords in order to debate, in order to meet my need for self-actualization. Food has been an integral part of self-actualization throughout human history, and you talk about human achievement. Let's talk about religion and spirituality. Whether it's communion or Shabbat or the Passover, the act of eating has been part of our ability to self-actualize in understanding our place in the universe. Because taking something into ourselves is something we can do not only to sustain our life, but in order to commemorate occasions and also to remind ourselves of instances past. And I'll continue.
I just have a quick question, and you can answer this as briefly as you want. Were I to undergo a dietary habit that limited my ability to pursue my job and have relationships with others, would you support that or not support that?
I would not support that. And that'll be part of my second beat, if it's all right for me to reserve my full answer.
Okay, I appreciate that. Look, guys, the omission here ends the debate. For my opponent to say that there are other things more important than how we eat, such as self-actualization, and Maslow continues even on to the 6th level that few people know about self-transcendence, worth a good Google search, by the way. For my opponent to say that there are other things higher than the act of eating, and to even admit that, you know, an eating habit that gets in the way of your job is bad, doesn't support his side of the resolution. The resolution has a very explicit burden, namely that his side is to defend that we must live to eat. This resolution is unique in that it has two burdens. It illustrates two parts of the resolution and assigns one to me and one to him. Humans should eat to live, not live to eat, means that disproving the res means we support living so that we can eat. But as my opponent just illustrated, he doesn't view eating as the end goal. He doesn't view eating as the end priority, because if eating ever conflicts with the stuff that he views as a higher priority, like living in self-actualization or living in pursuing your goals, he no longer supports it. So let's get down to his one argument of Abraham Maslow. My response is needs for life. It's very interesting that my opponent is using Abraham Maslow. The hierarchy of needs is a need, are the needs that you need to live. The whole point of the hierarchy of needs is so that you experience longevity, so you don't die and have a miserable existence. So yes, I'm not saying that eating is irrelevant to longevity, but here's the point. When you have a choice, when you have an actual conflict between living and increasing longevity and eating food, what do you choose? My opponent has already said that when it conflicts with other aspects of good living, like self-actualization, he's not going to support the dietary choices that restrict that. So already he's throwing eating under the bus and saying that stuff matters more. Let's get down to my second response is explicitly prioritizes others. If you're going to be a con in this debate, it means that your entire goal, what you want the most out of life, is to eat. As the dictionary defines, it means that eating is your favorite activity. It is your priority. Life and existence are just the means to the end of your dinner plate. Now, he's not actually supporting that, guys. He goes back and he says, well, eating is important to get two other goals, but that just illustrates the whole problem with his case, that eating isn't the priority for him. He only supports eating when it's a means to other ends. In other words, when eating doesn't at all conflict with longevity. So to break it down, we have to look at examples where we must choose. I support denying a little bit of dietary enjoyment so that you live longer. I support choosing a salad so you don't have cardiac arrest at the age of 49. I'm actually willing to detract from one side to support the other. My opponent is not at all detracting from longevity. He's not supported his side in the debate.
Let me clarify my earlier statement as it regards to food choices, and you were talking about work, which I believe falls under both safety and love and belonging. You can make food choices that get in the way of your ability to work, or you can make food choices that actually support your ability to work. You see, if you choose only to eat to live and only for longevity, you're going to make yourself unable to perform a great variety of tasks, both work-related and family-related. Case in point, the professional athlete cannot make the choice to eat just for longevity, like, say, the Japanese farmer who sustains himself on rice and on fish. He has to make the deliberate choice to eat more calories than he needs just to live because his work requires him to perform a different kind of task. Similarly, I'm an attorney. Sometimes throughout the day, I might need a little bit more sugar than someone who's sitting around doing nothing. A person whose job requires a great deal of other types of physical activity might have to make food choices that provide more protein or more carbohydrates than someone who simply needs to sit around all day. Furthermore, you say that the goal is longevity, but a long life that is empty is not a life worth pursuing. You see, Maslow doesn't have anything in his hierarchy, nor in his scholarship that I've read, about just trying to live a long time. We're right now talking about the love and relationships part of the ladder, which is where work enjoyment falls. Visual prop. This is the leftovers from my daughter's dinner tonight. I could have chosen just to throw enough food at her to sustain her life. I could have chosen just to throw the types of food at her that would have sustained her life and done the same for myself. But this was a daddy-daughter date. So instead, we made the choice to eat a food that we enjoyed. That food provided the basis for us to have conversations such that you can have with a 3-year-old. It led into the rest of our activities for the night. The cooking itself was a form of bonding activity for the two of us. Now, did choosing the cheeseburger necessarily make our lives longer? No, because there are goals beyond longevity. And one of them is, as Maslow identifies, love and relationships. Whether it's making a pleasurable food choice to further a date or a romantic relationship or a relationship with your children, this is one example of a food choice where eating for pleasure is good.
Okay, let's distill a few things. First, my opponent's argument about Japanese farmers as well as athletes. Remember my response as different needs, different life. You don't have to vote con to agree with the idea that certain people have different needs to maintain basic homeostasis, which is where your body essentially maintains itself and doesn't perish. So my opponent's saying, well, some athletes need more food to survive. He's, again, not understanding the res. The res is not saying all people need exactly the same amount of calories to live. It's saying, should your lifestyle be one that glorifies life and uses food to get there, or glorifies food and only treats life as the means to that end? So yeah, absolutely, people have different needs to survive. Eating an appropriate number of calories with a high metabolism as an athlete actually promotes your survival. You don't want to be at the Olympics and passing out on stage because you only ate 400 calories the night before. So this is only a turn argument illustrating how actual correct eating will help your longevity, not how glorifying food damages it, and that's good. My second response is the cheeseburger is the outlier. I'm glad my opponent brought this up. The cheeseburger is actually the first example I thought of when I think about an example that doesn't prove conflict in this resolution. Eating a single cheeseburger does not have any demonstrable long-term effects on longevity. Not to throw myself out there, but I actually study nutrition at Southern Methodist University as one of my classes. I also train physically very hard, and I have a 9% body fat percentage. Not trying to brag, that is just an actual fact. And I don't eat well all the time. If you see my Snapchat story, I'm at the cafe, I'm eating some fried foods. But the thing is, I don't live my lifestyle in a way that prioritizes my food at the expense of longevity. So I'm not saying that there can't ever be a moment where you enjoy a burger. What I'm saying is your principle on the whole should not put food above your life. And that's exactly what the resolution is describing. The last thing he says is, he says, well, there are emotional needs that we have. I'm glad my opponent brought this up. I'm going to give you two responses. The first is, don't live by this principle. Yes, you can enjoy social interaction around food. I'm not disagreeing with that. But if you're going to actually implement on scale in society the principle of, well, we should just eat because it makes us feel good, you're going to wind up with the exact same problems that American children are facing all across the country. Obesity is the #2 killer in America. It predisposes you for coronary heart disease. And one of the biggest things we notice about people that are obese is that they have these super strong emotional attachments to food. What I'm saying is you can have those great social connections, you can bond with others, but if you literally always train yourself to think about social interaction in terms of food, then you're going to lead down an addictive, self-destructive lifestyle that isn't good for you. My last argument is this. To be con, take food and put it at the top of the hierarchy. Put it at the top of the pyramid. How can you defend that your point of living is to eat and agree that food shouldn't be at the absolute top and be the most important thing that we care about?
First of all, I'll refer people to the comments as far as what the actual pro and con in this in the debate is, because we actually had this discussion last night as to the breadth of what the con can be. Now, turning back to the example of the athlete, also bringing in the example of, for instance, the truck driver who has to make food choices that don't promote longevity, that promote his lifestyle. These are lifestyles that, in fact, demonstrably contribute to shorter lifespans, but they are life choices that people make, and that people have to change their diets to meet those. Athletes have shorter lifespans, but what they gain from their shorter lifespans is a greater deal of enjoyment while they're alive. And in order to meet that goal, they have to make eating choices that contribute to their lifestyle beyond mere longevity. Now, you talk about eating as part of feeling good. That leads me into the self-actualization part of Maslow's hierarchy. I touched on this earlier, because sometimes the food choices you make that do not contribute to your longevity don't contribute to food enjoyment either. And the primary example of this is in religion. Fasting is a common theme across various religions, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism. This is the choice to deny oneself food, which would contribute to one's health and longevity, as part of seeking self-actualization, because the fasting allows one to is an eating choice which eliminates food for a short time to contribute to self-actualization. After the fasting often comes a large meal, which is a second step to the self-actualization. This doesn't necessarily contribute to longevity, but it contributes to the contemplation of what one deprived oneself for the time period that one was fasting, and also brings into one's consciousness the availability of plenty. Also, in Judaism in particular, you have the frequent food choice of the Shabbat meal on Fridays. Not a meal that is geared towards specifically longevity or nutrition, but one that's geared towards celebration and contemplation. Often a larger, more pleasurable meal with family, but it serves a purpose other than just eating to live. It's eating to think of God. It's eating to think on family. It's eating to think on spiritual matters. Likewise, communion in the Christian religion. You're not increasing your longevity by taking the bread and the cup. What you are doing is contributing to your self-actualization. These are goals where you live to eat that on Sundays so that you self-actualize rather than just living.
Okay, so I appreciate my opponent's prodigious use of examples here. I'm going to go through just a couple of notes here. First, the claim that athletes all have shorter lives is very unfounded. I didn't see a piece of evidence on that, and I don't really know why that would be true. I mean, living your life, maybe if like you're playing the NFL and you get a concussion and you die because of an injury, that's one thing. But just to say in general athletes have shorter lives, it's not really true. Okay, let's stem down. I'm going to make a line-by-line response. I want to clarify something real quick because I really feel that there's some confusion in this route. What my opponent has done is I've said we should eat to maintain basic homeostasis and health so that we can live long and enjoy our existence. My opponent has said, yeah, but there's a lot of other things that eating also does. Let me clarify. That in no way disproves the resolution. It is in no way a part of con advocacy, and the amount that you agree with that statement will not determine how hard you smash the con button. You shouldn't at all. Here's why. If my opponent's actually going to say that we should not eat to live, you can't just say, well, there are some other reasons why. I mean, if I said, well, I enjoy driving because I get to listen to music, there can be multiple reasons behind that. You wouldn't say, no, you don't enjoy driving because you listen to music. You enjoy driving because, you know, you get to talk on the phone and also get to work. Those can be additional things I enjoy. They aren't exclusive, and they don't disprove that I enjoy listening to music while I drive. So my opponent tacking on and saying, hold up, pal, there are a few extra things you also enjoy, doesn't disprove the statement that we should eat to live, that we should take in food so that it promotes our longevity. That's not a preclusive, exclusive statement that means we must sit in a box eating saltines until the day we die so that we can make it to 125. That's not the argument. My opponent as well hasn't even come close to defending the inverse of the statement, which is his burden, that we should not live to eat. He hasn't given a single example of how our life's purpose predicated on eating is good. He hasn't given an illustration of how that's been healthy. He hasn't talked about the social impacts of encouraging people to do that. He hasn't talked about the links between emotional eating. There's no advocacy out of the con that would lead you to believe that living to eat is good. With that, let's go line by line. So first, on the truck driver and the athletes and truck drivers, they're not living to eat. An athlete doesn't say, well, yeah, the trophy thing was okay, but what I really enjoyed the most, the highest moment of euphoria in my career was sitting down at IHOP after I won the gold. No one ever says that. That's not their purpose. Last thing he says is fasting. I actually fast every day for 8 hours, and it's actually for my own health. This, again, proves that we take in food for our own living. This is a turn argument. Lastly, he talks about religion. My response is maintenance versus purpose. I'm defending that food is maintenance. It's functional. It's a means to the end of living. He should be defending that that living is simply the means to the end of that living is the ends to eating. That's what matters the most. That's what's the priority. So I'm defending it as maintenance. He should have been defending it as purpose. There's just no con advocacy here, and so I don't think that your decision should be difficult.
The very first beat of this argument, my opponent defined this debate as a matter of prioritizing. He defined it as he was defining eating to live as prioritizing life and longevity over other purposes for eating. I have, in fact, taken the con by demonstrating multiple other purposes for eating other than life and longevity that take priority for the higher actualized person over simply eating to meet the physiological need. My opponent used the phrase instances where we must choose between food enjoyment and life and longevity. Again, a matter of priorities. So what I'm talking about here is instances in the higher actualized person where you make the choice to prioritize eating in another part of your life as opposed to eating simply to live. My opponent, for instance, points to his version of fasting, which is a form of fasting to live, to create, as he says, homeostasis. That is highly distinct from the kind of fasting that I have pointed out, which is fasting for self-actualization, for religious purposes, for contemplation, for community. But now we can talk about making food choices where you're eating more than is necessary for homeostasis, and you're doing so with a purpose toward other than homeostasis. Looking at this third rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs again, love and belonging. Aside from the religious ceremony where one chooses to eat less, there is the religious ceremony where one chooses to eat more. In the Baptist tradition, we have the potluck dinner. We're certainly not eating all of those casseroles for homeostasis. We're doing it for a sense of community. We're doing it to show appreciation for the people who have cooked those meals. We are cooking those meals ourselves, not to sustain ourselves or other human beings, but in order to show appreciation for the community. We also have holidays. And what's the ultimate holiday? Where we make food choices not based on how to survive, but on commemorating an event. Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, in fact, was a holiday that commemorated the ability to eat to sustain oneself for homeostasis. But on the occasion of Thanksgiving, we don't just eat enough to live. We live for that day of eating, just as the Pilgrims did for that massive celebration with the Native Americans. It was a day where they chose to celebrate the ability to eat, just to simply eat to live on other days, by eating for other purposes, including pleasure on that particular day. These are examples of living to eat that are good.
Okay. Let's make this relatively brief. First, no, I do not live for Thanksgiving. And I would really encourage anyone watching not to live for that day in November. It's coming up, but it's not the end-all be-all of your life. There's a lot more ahead of you, I promise. Let's step down into the grammar and logic of this resolution so that we can make it simple. This resolution is special because it has two clauses. One is humans should eat to live. The other is not live to eat. The implication being humans should not live to eat. To support the resolution, I think it's most reasonable that I support both clauses, that I not just pick one and ignore the other. So let's look at my argument. I first talked about why eating so that we live is healthy and how our body needs certain amounts of calories to function, and that not ever increasing, but excessively and consistently going over those and giving our body what it doesn't need is damaging, self-destructive, and really hurts society at the largest level. The second thing I've talked about is why we should not live to eat. And those are all the arguments about emotional eating, addiction, how there's more to life than simply our next plate, etc. So I've done both of those. Now I want you to look down at my opponent's argumentation. There are two clauses here. On the first one, the only one that he's actually spent time talking about is the humans should eat to live. And his attempt to disprove this is to say humans should not eat to live. They should eat to live and do a bunch of other things that increase and enhance your life, like self-actualization, self-transcendence. Self-transcendence doesn't kill you. Self-actualization doesn't kill you. None of these things detract from the statement. And what's so important to remember is, in addition, another added benefit to my side of the res in no way is a logical contradiction. If we said, why do you go to the gym? Well, I go to the gym because I like to look good. You could say, well, no, you don't. You go to the gym because, you have a free membership. That can be another reason why you go, but it's not a reason to reject the argument. It doesn't disprove that you also like to look good. The second thing is, the second clause is completely ignored. This is what's so critical. The only sentence of support for Khan is when he says we live for Thanksgiving, which I'm saying, no, we better not, because you'll link into all the arguments about addiction and emotional eating and lifestyles that are truly self-destructive.
I didn't realize you had passed the mic. No, I did not live just for Thanksgiving. I also live for Christmas. I live for Easter, Valentine's Day. I live for Memorial Day. I live for the 4th of July. I live for my birthday. I live for my kids' birthdays. I live for my wife's birthday. I live for anniversaries. I live for those potluck dinners. I live for communion services. I live for the days when I fast with my Bible. I live for the days when I break the fast. I live for the days when I wake up in the morning with my cup of coffee and my donut. I live for the days when I sit down at night with my salad and my glass of water. Eating just to live, which is how my opponent originally cast this argument, prioritizing life and longevity in eating as opposed to prioritizing other goals, is a Spartan way of living. My opponent raises these doomsday specters of food addictions, but there's another doomsday specter, and that is the specter of the eat to live movement, which encourages these crash diets, which are, as my opponent says, limited to the calories you need to live or even less. Science has proven many times these crash diets do not work in the long term and can be just as destructive as food addiction because they don't work in the long term. What does work in the long term is a life where we balance eating what is necessary to sustain this homeostasis, but also consciously making the decision to eat in situations that achieve other life goals, whether it's romantic goals, family goals, work goals, or self-actualization goals, such as religious goals. Again, my opponent started this debate with the statement, this is instances where we must choose between food enjoyment versus life and longevity. Only after I demonstrated that there are valid times, and many of them, where we appropriately choose food enjoyment to meet needs above mere physiological needs, did he retreat to attempting to put the burden on me to say, did he shift it to say that I'm attempting to claim that no, we don't need to eat to live at all? But what I'm saying is that when we make these food choices that fulfill these other self-actualization goals, which we are free to do at a society of plenty, we still get enough food to sustain homeostasis. But instead of just eating to live, we are living to eat for higher purposes other than just sustaining our lives.
This down into two main issues. The first, additions aren't contradictions. To add and say that eating to live is bad because there are other things besides life that matter isn't a logical statement. I've already pointed out numerous times logically that adding other stuff onto it doesn't make sense. Now, this is what's so crucial. Literally, ignore my whole speech. You can cut the browser tab right now, but get these words. My opponent is inserting words into the res. He says humans should eat just to live. Yeah, that's what the resolution said as arguments would link, but it doesn't. I'm not talking about eating so that you will only live and never do anything else, to sit in a room and eat saltines for the rest of your life. I'm talking about eating to maintain health. Extend the grammatical analysis. My opponent isn't defending either clause. Thanks.